ensure that we have enough food secured to feed our nation going forward? Or is it to make sure that those starving are able to find food to eat in the next 24 hours? And I concluded that, that's probably a big challenge in our food system and our food structure is there are so many burning fires, so many immediate priorities, and we tend to just knee-jerk from one fire to another. And so I think that's why it's so important that we've got the new National Food Strategy. And whilst, we know that it covers a huge amount of subjects within the food sector, we know it's not going to cover anything. And we know that some of the areas within it are not quite as some would like. But, my feeling is that we need a plan. We need a plan that's going to take us through the short, the medium, and the longer term. And somebody's not on mute and very heavy breathing. And so we need a plan that's going to take us through the short, medium, and longer term, so we can make sure that we do cover off all of these very important things and address the issues with our fractured food system. Our ambition today, really, as Devon Food Partnership, is to bring together some of the experts in the food sector in our region and get their opinions on particular elements within the food sector. And what we want to take from today is, with the feedback from yourselves, the audience, is to formulate that all into a brief, into a report, and then share that with the National Food Strategy team, so it may be considered as part of the white paper considerations, and also with other interested parties. So just what I might do is just start to share my screen, if it will work. It's always the sort of tense bit. There we go. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see that. Now I'm going to move to the agenda. So this is part of the welcome and introduction. We've had a couple of late people join us, so just to remind them that we will be recording the event, so please switch off your cameras if you don't want to be seen. Shortly I'll hand over to Charlie, who will give a brief outline to the Devon Food Partnership and what we're aiming to do. We'll then move on to introduce our speakers. First, we're very privileged to have Ian Smith with us. Ian's going to cover the public sector and schools and is very well qualified to do so. He's had a career that spans education, regeneration and transformation, and he plays a leading role in some of the many social and sustainability projects across Devon and centred and focused around Plymouth in particular. Then Ed Humber is going to join us. Ed's from the NFU. He's an assistant Devon County officer for the NFU. And Ed's going to talk about how the National Food Strategy may play a part in future farming. NFU have been integral to the formation of the National Food Strategy and many other of the current legislative and affecting issues that affect agri-food. So looking forward to that. Then delighted to introduce Dr. Nicola Frost, who will delve into the world of food security, which is critically important for all of us. Nicola is a social anthropologist, a knowledge guru for Devon Community Foundation, and involved in many very valuable and valid insecurity projects across the region. We'll then be joined by Emily Reid. Emily is a Devon Climate Emergency Project Lead for Devon County Council, so is extremely well qualified to talk about what the National Food Strategy might mean to sustainability. And then finally, we introduce David Hind. David is the Programme and Partnership Manager at the Heart of the Southwest LEP Growth Hub, Local Enterprise Growth Hub. And David's going to just look into very briefly what the National Food Strategy might mean for local businesses and regional businesses. And then from there, we'll move on into the Q&A panel, and then we'll just summarise at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand across to Charlotte Molyneux, Charlie, to talk to you a little bit about Devon Food Partnership.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm just going to give a quick kind of overview of what the Devon Food Partnership is and what we've been doing. So it's a strategic food partnership that enables collaboration and an open line of communication between food stakeholders across the county. Set up, we're kind of fairly young. We set up earlier this year in February, and we're a member of, as you see the logo on the screen, we're a membership with Sustainable Food Places. Now, this is a national programme that looks to improve systems at a local level. It's jointly led by 3 organisations: Sustain, Food Matters and Soil Association. So this is part of a kind of a wider national programme to look at key issues around food. So the partnership is tackling a range of food themes through the work that we're doing. And these are shaped around the 6 key principles of sustainable food places. And just to quickly tell you what those are healthy food for all, food for the planet, food and governance strategy, sustainable food economy, catering and procurement, and good food movement. So it's a wide range of issues to be looking at. And how that looks like in practice under the Devon Food Partnership is we set up an interim steering group that meet monthly. And actually the majority of talks you'll hear today are members of that steering group, and it brings together people from and organisations from right across the different sectors, looking at kind of different areas of these food themes. So a lot of expertise, a lot of knowledge, a wide network, and at those meetings we look at those different key issues. And what arises from those meetings is task groups. So when we see a kind of an action derived from those discussions at that meeting, we put together the task groups to look at what we can do to support that. So this event is actually as a result of one of those task groups. We've got other groups at the moment that we're looking at a strategy for our Devon Food Partnership and what we want to kind of look at our objectives, what we want to achieve. And also another one of our task groups at the moment is around increasing the uptake of Healthy Start vouchers within the county. So again, looking at kind of different key areas, threading through those different themes of the sustainable food places. Kind of hopes for the future is that we want to gain, we want to be brilliant at looking at positive change for the key issues in food. So the sustainable food places do offer kind of awards, and we're looking to achieve the bronze status in 2022. And if you want to keep up to date with the work that we're doing under the Food Partnership and want to become involved, I'm going to put some key our website in the chat. It's on the screen there, but I'll put it on the chat so you've got a link to it, and also a link to the Sustainable Food Places website as well, so you can kind of have a look at a national level what's happening. But I hope you enjoy the session today. We've got lots of interesting speakers, and really encourage you to ask lots of questions, put your comments in the chat, and I'll hand back to Greg.
Thanks, Charlie. That's great. So just again for latecomers, just to reiterate that the challenge for our experts is to keep to time, and I'll try and help with that. So yes, as Charlie said, if you can put any questions in the chat or save them until the Q&A session later, then that would be fantastic. And of course, this event assumes that participants have a bit of a knowledge of the National Food Strategy, because we are going to delve into some of the specific recommendations. But if not, then I would advocate going and reading it, and we have provided a link already and can do as well going forward. So without further ado, our first speaker is Ian Smith, and Ian's going to talk about how the National Food Strategy may play a significant role in the future for public sector and schools. So I'll hand over to you, Ian, and move on to your slide, hopefully. There we go.
Brilliant. Thank you, Greg, and great to be here, everyone. So good to see you all. So I think the thing about the public sector, and here talking about the wide public sector, including schools and educational settings, prisons and others, is that I'm told that the government spends £2 billion a year on public sector catering in those fields. That's an extraordinary thing. It's just an extraordinary phenomenon. In terms of numbers of the actual meals themselves, NHS 141 million inpatient meals a year, schools 602 million lunches a year, and prisons 93 million meals annually. So I think the whole point about that is that small changes can really have a major multiplier effect, really significant, and it's a vital area to look at. So I think this is one of the key things to focus in on that. I think the key benefits here, I think, to persuade policymakers, and the Sustainable Food Places team nationally say the gold standard is to influence policy rather than have voluntary sign up, although voluntary sign up is very valuable in itself, but to actually shape strategy and policy. There's something really fundamental here about embedding congruence and preventing dissonance. So not having trans fats in hospitals, where people are having heart surgery and situations like that, and school meals reflecting the climate and nature emergencies, not teaching the young people about the major crisis the planet's facing, and then feeding them poor quality, high impacts, chicken, for example, that's been flown from halfway around the world. So I think there's a really big important thing around that. Also, there's something about public institutions can say we're putting our money where our mouth is. Leon Ballin from the Sustainable Food Places talks about that, of that authenticity and that credibility that comes with that. I think in terms of the National Food Strategy itself, I was asked to pick up on 3 points to focus in on. From what Greg said earlier, it might only be 1 point really, but let's go with 3 here. There's something really fundamental, I think, about escaping the junk food cycle. Recommendation 3, launch a new Eat and Learn initiative for schools. And I've been involved in sustainable food work for about 11 years now. And the whole education and learning piece to go with that across the board, not just children and young people, but wider society, wider community, is absolutely fundamental. But if you start with the young people, it will percolate through as they age and as they influence their parents and grandparents. So I think that Eat and Learn initiative is very exciting and something we could engage in on a Devon-wide basis. There's something absolutely fundamental here about reducing inequalities as well. Recommendation 4 was about extending the free school meals eligibility. 5 was continuing the holiday activities and food HAF program. And then 6 was expanding the Healthy Start scheme, which was touched on earlier. And I think all of those will have a profound impact, and they're ones that we can influence, I think, at a Devon-wide level and need to be working into. I'm very, very impressed by the work of Foodwise in Leeds, who've done some amazing work with Leeds City Council and the wider Yorkshire and Humber region there, around pressing for the best you can have. In Food Plymouth, we have best food forward has become our slogan and to some extent our strategy. And I'd like to see Devon doing something along those lines, informed by Foodwise Leeds. We've even done things like develop an app to help track and help establishments make decisions, which I think is brilliant. And there's something fundamental. I've cheated here by combining 2 together, which is land use and food culture. There's recommendation 10, establishing minimum standards, and there is some great work around that. And recommendation 13, improving government procurement. Now, there are standards, certainly around schools and hospitals, and I think the strategy, the National Food Strategy, sees opportunities to influence those even more. And I think improving government procurement is a dynamic piece. And procurement generally is so vital and fundamental and vibrant at the moment. I think the COVID pandemic, disaster though it's been, has actually sparked that and the attention on food. And I think we need to build on the opportunities that come with that. So in terms of opportunities here in Devon, including Plymouth and our colleagues over there in the Torbay area as well, who are on the call. We've got less and better meat, which is a widespread piece of work going on to go for better quality, but less of it. British, ideally. Food for Life served here certification through the Soil Association, and likewise, same organisation does the Green Kitchen Standard certification. We mustn't forget sustainable fish cities, which I think nowadays we would call places, which is a Sustain campaign, Sustain the Alliance for Better Food, Farming and Fishing. And again, with our colleagues across there in Brixham, we could do some good work on that, I think, and elsewhere in Devon. there's a brilliant new campaign just out, and Sustain are asking us to speak with our MPs about this, on Back British Farmers. And I think that's great because, again, food-wise, again, went for local, went for British, and everything that goes with that. Dynamic food procurement, there's a lot to be said about that, about involving smaller producers, and there's some great work going on at the Southwest Food Hub. And in fact, I'll plug them. They've got an event on that on Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning online. And then also there's the whole Preston model, the community wealth building model, anchor institutions, public institutions acting as anchors, modeling best practice, and buying locally, and massive local multiplier and other benefits coming out of that. So really, I mean, what that comes down to is improving health and well-being, taking climate action rather than just talking about it, the local economy, local multiplier effects. And I think the fundamental thing, borrowing from Wales, is the well-being of future generations. I think in England we are behind, and we do really well to pick up on that. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much indeed. Look forward to the questions.
Exemplary, Ian. Exemplary, bang on time, as I'd expect, and covered a hell of a lot of ground in a short space of time there. And I think, yeah, I mean, the big drag from that is that, you know, the public sector is well positioned to be a tool to shape the future food system because of the impact it has on the food sector, and that's really come through loud and clear there. I suppose just if I can be cheeky, because I said no questions except for obviously the host can sort of maybe ask the proper question, but you know, with your experience of schools, Ian, what do you, how well would a new approach to food be received by within the curriculum as is proposed? You know, do you think that it would just be another thing laboured on schools to implement, or do you think they would receive it with some enthusiasm?
There is some absolutely brilliant practice around this, so I'm quite optimistic for it. So, I mean, taking the Plymouth example, they were able there in Plymouth when everything was fragmented about 10 years or so ago. They managed to bring together a municipal cooperative social enterprise, which is called Cater Ed, which was basically a cooperative of about 2/3 of the schools in the city. And they've got a really strong local procurement, high welfare standards, high nutritional standards approach. So things like that, I think there are opportunities to explore those kind of things. In Lambeth in London, and also with Foodwise in Leeds again, they've done a lot to, you can't control what these fragmented and academy, you know, chain type organizations do. However, you can influence them, and if you engage intelligently and sensibly with them on that, persuade them of the benefits and build the case, there have been some really good examples where in fact they've seen the sense of that and have in fact got benefits across the board for themselves, financially, nutritionally, you know, all other ways, and in terms of the reputation standing as well. So I think I'm quite optimistic for the scope for that, but it does need a really intelligent, sort of sensitive to them and what their needs are type approach, like most things in life, really. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, without further ado, I shall hand over to Ed Hummer. And Ed's going to just cover the perspective of farming and how the National Food Strategy might affect you. Just over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everyone. So it's just going to be a real brief overview, as Ian's done. 7 minutes isn't very long. So thank you for asking me to come along and speak and represent our farming members and fellow farmers across the county. Devon is great. It's a unique county. It's got 2 upland areas, we've got parts of Exmoor and we've also got Dartmoor. So we have a particular focus on upland farming as well as lowland, as well as highly productive arable and grazing livestock areas. So we have a very diverse and wide-ranging agricultural system here in the county. But it's a good place to be a barometer, a barometer for what actually happens on the ground, what positives can be made, and also to raise perhaps some of the concerns from the farming sector about various points that are brought up in this document as well. Start there, recommendation 8, to the guaranteed budget for agricultural payments until at least 2029. So the report talks about £2.2 billion being put back into the system to allow for a longer transition period. So we currently have agreement from government that the current levels would be supported for the term of the government, which technically is 2024, and the current basic payment system, or farm subsidy, however people want to call it, is phased out by 2027. So by 2024, due to the reduction system that's currently being implemented by government, then we'll be back to 50% of current BPS levels, running with the hope that the ELMS and various other schemes would be picking up the remainder. The acknowledgement to 2029 is fantastic from a farming perspective. It gives people a long time to plan. I mean, agricultural cycles are incredibly long. Just if you take anything, livestock production or planting crops or anything else, you know, you're talking this year for next, and you're putting your soils ready and right for the following year. If you are raising cattle, it's going to be 2 to 3 years before you see a return from that animal, and sheep is sort of 6 to 8 months from a lamb being born to the point of it being gone, and dairy can be, you know, multiple generations of animal on the same farm. So having that longer continuity is great. You know, there's an assessment that we made, and it is £1 of government support, it turns into £7 in the local economy. So it actually is very wise and a good decision, because it actually supports the whole of the local economy across Devon whilst the transition happens. The recommendation 9 of create a rural land use framework based on the 3 compartment model, it can cause some concern, because it's quite a blanket approach in respect of the wish is to map the country and map areas that seem to be more suitable for certain types of farming, i.e. highly productive land pushed hard, and lower production land, which they talk of somewhere around 400,000 square kilometres, hectares coming out, it is to be used for other parts, perhaps it's nature, biodiversity, parkland as some respect. The concerns here is that on a Devon farm, you might have all 3 aspects in one farm, and it's making sure that broad brush approach accounts for that, because our members and our farmers deserve the chance to be able to still rear livestock or raise or crop or whichever they want to do, or it's grow veg or whatever they want to do on their portion of land. The great positive was defining the minimum standards for trade and a mechanism to protect them. We see as an agricultural sector many trade deals coming forth that ultimately, although the food standard for safety of those animals can be appreciated and recognised very easily, because it's very easy to match a country's food safety standard, other standards are not. So environmental standards are one of the areas that can cause the biggest discrepancies, because if you've got a grass-fed beef animal living on the uplands in Devon, it will have a completely different carbon footprint to that of an animal raised in Brazil or Mexico or similar in a large feedlot. And there is one other point we must make in this, is that it's good to see the report also recognise that every farming system must be utilised, because ultimately to hit the mark, the culture that we require in this country, where we need some cheap food and we also need a higher end market, we need access for everyone to have access to food at an affordable value, we must also have some intensification. So poultry, pigs, some intense beef areas, some intensive livestock areas, some intensive arable and also vegetable areas. They must happen for us to be able to meet those areas. And actually, when you talk of carbon footprint and impact, that is vastly reduced in some respects through intensification, provided it's done correctly. And we've got many years of experience in the UK. Part of the reason why we've had intensification is because there's been a drive for a cheap food price in the UK, and as a result, you therefore were encouraged to be as progressive and productive as possible, with reducing as much as you can the impact. So I hope that sort of covers most of it. Here for any questions. That's it from me.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks very much. I mean, I'll just again abuse my position as chair to just probe a couple of probe a little bit further. I mean, the National Food Strategy talks about the need for us as consumers to perhaps reduce the amount of animal protein in favour of plant-based. How's that being received and interpreted in the farming sector?
I'm not going to lie, it doesn't go down very well, because the report also states that, you know, the carbon footprint and impact on global emissions from the UK agricultural sector is 20%. When you include imported food, it takes it by a whole extra 10% up. That's half as much again. I think this is where the discrepancy comes, that you could have a balanced diet with similar amounts of red meat that you do now, or meat in general, provided you are sourcing it sustainably and from a food system that's being done sustainably. And if it's being fed a lot of grass, if it's not being pumped full of imported product with palm oil and soya and all the rest of it. And I think the other question to also ask is, if you do go to the alternative, you've got to be very clear, and that you don't inadvertently cause an environmental impact on the opposite way. So exposing more soils because of more land is used for production cycles that when we see higher rainfall, whereas grassland is protecting that through winter months. And then also equally culture. You know, people need to have a choice, and I think we've got to make sure that we're not trying to be too prescriptive, and that people should see a choice. Not every alternative is actually environmentally better. And I think that's the key point, really, is that from the agriculture community, they just want a fair hearing, and they don't want to feel that A, there's a land grab, because land must be converted without their choice, and they're almost feeling to be pushed away, and B, that the products they create that are sustainable, healthy, because no raw product is unhealthy unless you mix it in the wrong way, and that is recognised, so that they feel, I suppose, more rewarded and also more respected for what they do.
No, I think that's really important, you know, and if we sort of tapping back into Ian's subject, is I think that it starts with education, and I think we all have a responsibility, and I think the National Food Strategy can play a role in that, is making sure that people, the consumers and the purchasers of food, have sufficient information to make informed decisions. And that means truthful information, and not necessarily listening to, you know, some of the things that we read and see in the press that only look at one side of the argument, perhaps. And just one other, just quick one, if I may, is, you know, from my observation, there's carrot and stick for the agri-food world at the moment, and I just would be interested, as you live inside it, is, do you think there's enough carrot to offset the amount of stick that the farming sector is getting at the moment?
Every farmer would prefer to take their carrot from the market, and that is the whole truth. To have a budget to support transition is fantastic, and for farmers, ultimately providing food and also looking after the environment, then their payment is acceptable. I think it's required. I think what we need to be careful of is that regulation to try and enforce change will alienate some, but it will also may make it harder. I think if you can take people on the journey and ask them what they believe will work on their farm and how can it benefit the environment, the local economy and the local area, and get those questions answered by the people actually on the ground. I mean, some of these people have been there for many generations. If you talk of the upland farmers, you're talking multiple generations that lived in a very harsh area that's hard to farm. We do not want to lose those skill sets. So I think it's asking the question of how can they help benefit it? How can they take that money that if that 2.2 billion is supported and help benefit all, then I think we'd go a long way towards the final goal.
Thanks, Ed. That's great. That's great. And I'm sure there'll be more questions a little bit later. But thanks for that coverage. OK, we're going to move on to Nicola, who's going to talk to us about food security. I'll just move my slide on, hopefully, and hand over to Nicola.
Thanks, everyone. I'm having a few connection problems this morning, so do kind of wiggle a hand or something if you stop being able to hear me. And just to say that I'm fairly new to the Devon Food Partnership. I'm just sort of in the process of taking over that link for the Devon Community Foundation. So it's really great to be here and to meet you all. And I hope we'll get to know each other a lot better over the next little while. I'm going to talk about food insecurity, actually. I think there's a little bit of a I don't know how to describe it, a sort of a slight mismatch between the terms food security and the way it's used within the National Food Strategy and the term food insecurity, which is what I've been associated with over the last year or so in Devon. In that food security is understood as a sort of macro level within the National Food Strategy, and it's looking at how we as a broader community, as a country, can feed ourselves adequately and can reduce the level of reliance on imported food. And it's really interesting to hear a farming perspective on the broad range of different kinds of agriculture which go on within Devon in that context. That's not anything that I know about, and that is not the way in which food insecurity tends to be understood, where we're looking at more of a household level and understanding whether households and families and individuals have adequate access to food. So they're quite different things, but they're sort of referred to in the same way. So I just thought that was important to say. So as I pointed out here, the strategy is right, and it says that actually, although COVID has exacerbated a lot of the inequality, which is closely associated with household food insecurity, there has also been a new level of attention paid to it and a new sense of urgency about the need to address it. So this is an opportunity. It's important to grasp these things, even when we're faced with significant data which shows us that the situation is quite a grim one. And I've been associated with, as a number of other people have, I'm sure, on this call, a piece of work that DCC conducted earlier in the year, surveying food insecurity in Devon. A really interesting piece of work which showed some very shocking findings in terms of the enormous uptick in food insecurity since the beginning of the pandemic. So there's a significant issue in Devon, but there is a new sort of focus and attention within both the voluntary and the public sector to try to improve the way in which we respond to it. So it is an opportunity. But the strategy really doesn't look into this, doesn't look into the impact of food insecurity on households at all. It's a complete absence. I don't think that's necessarily a criticism. It rightly points out that food insecurity, boldly speaking, is poverty, and poverty is not within the remit of this strategy too specifically. I think that it's obviously something that we need to fill this absence in some way within our local response. Mitigation and food support to individual families remains something that's important, but I think it's really important also, given that this is a sort of absent space within the strategy, to say that food insecurity obviously is a problem of poverty, and it's a problem of nutrition and hardship. But I think it's really important for us to sort of understand the importance of food as a social good within our society, and that access to food and access to opportunities to, for example, share food and use food as a kind of social mechanism are really significant, and that an absence of those things can lead to other problems relating to anxiety and social exclusion, and this other kind of broader remit, which is beyond one of hardship. So that's one thing that I would say that we need to sort of fill in between the lines in this strategy. So I think that there is a really important need for us to continue to think about how do we support accessible, community-based, so locally specific and locally appropriate initiatives which help to mitigate food insecurity in our communities. And the important word there is how. We've learned over the last year, as partly through the food insecurity survey that I mentioned previously, which showed that a large number of people who report being food insecure do not access emergency food support. A significant proportion of those people do not. Why? We don't know. There's a huge piece of work that needs to be done to put some qualitative flesh on that quant survey bones in terms of understanding that in more detail for different people and in different contexts. And the other reason why how is really important is that this is a fairly it's a complex and it's an interconnected issue. It's as I've mentioned, food insecurity is closely, obviously related to more general issues of financial hardship. And much of the response to it is a holistic one, which takes into account food needs, but also will look at other areas of somebody's life that can be supported appropriately. So it's really important to think about this in the round, and it's really important to think about ways in which this work can access, can be inclusive and accessible to all the different parts of our community. And then we need to learn more about how to do that and how we can share that information and do things more consistently across the piece. And part of the key to that is going to be in terms of productive relationships between public sector and voluntary sector partners, and in particular at district level where much of this work takes place. And so that's a piece of work that we've been partnering with DCC to make a start on earlier in the year, working at a district level with a number of voluntary sector organisations and district partners to try and understand the kind of landscape of that and how that works in different places. It's different in different places, but there's more to do there. And then the final point I want to make is that the National Food Strategy, it says it on the tin, it's a national document and it's interested in mechanisms to improve matters which can be nationally applied. And so Ian made mention of the HAF programme, the Holidays and Food Activities, the recommendation, which hasn't so far been taken up, to expand the eligibility for free school meals amongst children. These kind of mechanisms are they're the tools of central government. These are the things that can happen at a national level to try to improve things, and that's fine. But there are other things which need to happen, which can happen most effectively at a local level. And another example of that is the recommendations which refer to preventative work to help people understand the value of healthy eating and how to eat and cook and live well on a budget and those kind of things. The sort of solution or a mechanism suggested within the food strategy for promoting this is to do it through the primary care networks and through a sort of primary care based social prescribing type approach, because that's what's visible to central government as a way of encouraging and supporting these kind of initiatives. I suggest that they're not the most effective mechanisms for doing that kind of work. There's all kinds of reasons why that is that can't go into in 7 minutes. But I think if we're serious about that kind of preventative work, especially if we want that to connect with the emergency mitigation work that I've spoken about earlier, it's really important for us to think about how we might do that in more creative and more appropriate local contexts, which will involve inevitably, I think, partnership working between the public sector, but at a local level, and the voluntary sector to do that in more effective ways. So I think those are the areas that we need to be looking at. But as I say, they're not they're not necessarily touched on particularly heavily within the food strategy. So I think my plea would be not to forget these areas just because they don't feature within the strategy.
That's great, Nicola, and I wanted to let you carry on there a minute because it's very valid, so you're going to get away without a question for me for a second. But I think it's really important, just to the point you made earlier about what is food security, food insecurity. I think it's worth us making sure that actually we help to clarify that, because I think it can be interpreted in several different ways. And I was on a DEFRA call the other day that was an export call talking about food security, and then it took a while for me to realise they were talking about food security in the Middle East. You know, and it was out of context. So I think we need to be really clear on that. But yeah, I think the other key message that comes through is the importance to be successful of working across multiple sectors and government organisations in order for the whole thing to be successful. But thank you very much, very thorough indeed. Without further ado, I shall move us along to introduce Emily Reid, who's going to talk about sustainability. Emily, over to you. Hopefully there's your slide.
Great, thank you. So I was really hard pushed to choose 3 recommendations because actually, on the whole, I feel that the National Food Strategy is very closely aligned with much of what we've said in the Devon Carbon Plan. And I think what the conversation today shows is that we have lots of things to do because we need to use the levers on both the supply and the demand side of food, because it is, you know, we need whole system change really. So the first recommendation that I highlighted was the guarantee for the budget of agricultural payments until at least 2029 to help farmers transition to more sustainable land use, really because we need to ensure that payments are sufficiently generous to really incentivise farmers to transition to sustainable farming, and to deliver the things that we need them to deliver, particularly to tackle climate change, but also the biodiversity crisis, and also not just to reduce our emissions, but also to help us adapt to the impacts of climate change that we know are already with us and are set to have more impact in the coming years. I was particularly keen to see that the food strategy recommended that roughly a third of the ELMS budget should go on paying farmers per year, should go on paying farmers to manage land in ways that actively sequester carbon and restore nature. So I think we are asking a lot of our land, and we just have to be careful about how, you know, what are our priorities, and to have a coherent overview of what we ask of farmers, and to make it worth their while, and to give them options. So I think for us, we see ELMS as one mechanism to reward farmers for sequestering carbon, but there will need to be, and there are already other mechanisms as well, such as payment of carbon offsets, that, you know, people are suspicious of that happening further afield, where they can't see it. But if we can, there's an opportunity in Devon as well for carbon offset markets locally, where we can pay people to introduce more trees into their landscape, improve their practices to sequester more soil carbon, and these things can also be beneficial to farming, and can help farmers to adapt to things like drought, flooding, increased wind speeds at times of year, and so on. So it doesn't have to be that what's good for nature is bad for farmers. We need farmers to be able to choose what things on there fit into their farming system that will sequester carbon but also benefit their farming. So the second recommendation that I wanted to highlight was, as has already been mentioned, the creation of a rural land use framework, based on saying where will these different things we need to do with our land happen. So where will we increase our tree cover, because we need to get to closer to 17% of tree cover in Devon. We're currently closer to about 9%. So where is that best placed? Where is that not a good idea? For example, on our uplands, planting trees into peatland is probably not a very good idea, because it will increase, it will dry them out and potentially make them more of a carbon source than a carbon sink. So we need to have an overview, and then that will help to highlight to farmers what are the opportunities within your area, and how does the National Farm Subsidy Scheme, ELMS, incentivise you, and what options does it give you within that framework in your local area. And I think this is something that we're already exploring in more detail in Devon. The Food Farming and Countryside Commission is working on developing a land use framework for Devon, and so I think that's going to require a lot of stakeholder engagement, so that we can shape it up in a way that actually works for people involved, and doesn't just feel top down and tell farmers what they need to do on their patch, because that won't be very effective. So, you know, also I think, as I said, we need to change the demand side to really incentivise and reward farmers for sustainable farming practices. And so that's where we really need to use the lever of public procurement in particular. And that's something that's very clear in the Devon Carbon Plan. There's this idea of anchor institutions that's become very popular, not just in relation to food recently. Essentially, those big organisations in Devon which are not going anywhere, our hospitals, our schools, our local authorities, and we need to use that money better to drive the change in the local food system that we want, and also to increase the consumption of fruit and vegetables, because we know that that's most people don't meet those dietary needs, so, you know, and buying good quality meat, but to potentially less of it. And I think Nicola's points about an inclusive food culture, well, we have an opportunity through those institutions to sit down around a table and for everyone to have an access to good quality local food. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I forgot to turn my timer on. So
you're doing really well. But if you're at an end, I can probe a question that I've got burning, or you can carry on for a minute if you like.
Go on. Pass me a question and then I will.
So it related to the last thing you said. I mean, do you think that there is enough time and incentive for farmers to change, with a backdrop of incentives being offered to for farmers to leave farming?
Do I think there's enough time for
time? Do you think there's enough time and incentive for farmers to change, bearing in mind that DEFRA will pay farmers if they choose to leave the sector?
I think we're in for a very interesting, potentially exciting period of time, because I think there are people that want to enter farming in Devon. You know, we have at the moment, and I might be wrong, you know, Ed might correct me on this, but it feels like a lot of people are coming in through sort of more community gardening schemes, market gardens, because actually, for the most part, unless they have personal ties to farms, it's difficult for them to get access to larger scale farming. And actually, you know, for many of them, their interest lies in smaller scale food growing. So I think we will see, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the opportunity for farmers to potentially retire and that to be compensated for through ELMS, how that plays out locally, and how land ownership sort of changes locally as well. But I think there is interest and innovation in Devon as to farm ownership models, and also sort of potentially investment structures. There's some interesting things going on with potentially funds buying farms and then employing farmers on a salaried basis, and then also funding some of the regenerative farming style activities that might go on through carbon offset markets. So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation, and I understand that there's a lot of trepidation about that change because it could go in a number of directions, which is why I think we've got to engage with it closely and have a lot of stakeholder engagement to make sure the carbon offset markets and the agricultural subsidies we're paying for people deliver both socially for our farming community in Devon and also environmentally. But I think we have to remember that different parts of Devon, some parts of Devon have up to 92% of land under the management of farmers. So whilst the number of farmers is quite a small part of the population, their influence is absolutely staggering.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, a message to take from that is that, we should not use a sledgehammer to crack a nut here. We need to make sure that we engage all parties and be responsible and manage, the way forward, and not just throw the weight around. Okay, thanks, Emily. That's fantastic. And I'm going to hand across to David Hind, who's going to tell us what the National Food Strategy might mean for businesses. And I think there's a great sort of transition there from sustainability, because I personally believe that sustainability starts with financial sustainability, because if you haven't got a commercially sound base, then it's very difficult to make a difference. David, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what you just said there, Greg. It's one of the sort of underpinning challenges, really, when we look at the National Food Strategy and the recommendations that come out of it. There's lots in the strategy, as others have mentioned, and as Emily said in the last talk, lots of questions about what the recommendations might mean in practice and what you should do next. So to try and distill that a little and to create thought and discussion perhaps for the Q&A, I've kind of focused this presentation, this talk, around 3 key themes that I see emerging from the National Food Strategy recommendations. So one is transitioning to the new future, what the future for farming, food production and the food and drink sector looks like in practice. How will demand change for food? What does that mean for food production? What should businesses up and down the supply chain start thinking about, start doing? A second key theme for me is big data and communicating your messages. It's a big drive for greater transparency in how food produced, carbon footprint and everything else. How do you evidence that? How do you record that? How do you prove that to consumers? And then particularly for, I think, in the context of this group and the broad range of stakeholders involved, what are the new partnership opportunities? What are the opportunities to join up and do things better? How do us all as stakeholders work together to foster mutually beneficial partnerships? Could be new contract relationships, new informal or formal arrangements for working together. What is it we need to look at there and do next? So transitioning to the new future, then, what is the future direction of travel for the agri-food sector, food manufacturing, and all in the supply chain? Well, there's a couple of the recommendations, at least in the strategy document, that give strong signals, really, here. One is, first recommendation, a sugar and salt reformation tax. Now, I'm sure there's lots of thoughts around exactly what that means, how it's implemented, timescales and everything else. We've seen a sugar tax implemented since 2016 for the soft drinks industry. What will a broader approach possibly look like? And one of the things I think we need to think about here is that's another signal, really, another driver that's probably going to accelerate trends already happening in terms of changing food demand. So we're seeing consumers looking for ethical sourcing, traceable products, changes in the balance between plant-based and dairy and meat, much more interest in how food's produced, its carbon footprint, the waste produced from that, and then underlying issues which we mentioned by other speakers as well around, think about resilience in our food production and food security more broadly. So a lot of competing demands there, but we can see a direction of travel in terms of the food end products and what we might need to do and put in place to describe that product in the right way. And then recommendation 8, the payments to help farmers transition to more sustainable land use, particularly talking here about environmental enhancements and biodiversity, but there's a big balance to be struck here, really, about how you produce sustainable food and make your farming enterprise as a business commercially productive. If you're changing the way land's used, you're changing potentially the amount of available land for production. How do you address the farm productivity challenge? How do you balance that? We know that despite lots and lots of innovations in farming businesses over the last 20 years, productivity overall has remained about the same. And the shift in how land's used and the options available to farming businesses is a factor in that. So will the direction of travel we're seeing in the strategy make this challenge tougher or easier? Is there an opportunity for carbon sequestration to become a marketable product for farming businesses? Are there other parts of supply chain that can join up and partner up with farmers actually to turn what can seem like a challenge into a real opportunity for farming businesses? And then broadly then, what support is needed to accelerate the transition, make these changes? We know now, right now, for farming businesses, there's a Future Farming Resilience workshops available. You can book on, go on the Growth Hub website, book on a workshop. It can help you see where you need to move to in terms of changes in the payments regime. For your net zero journey, you can book on now to a Making Net Zero scheme that we've got available, particularly useful probably for food manufacturers. Offers advice and support to help you with your net zero journey. And all of those things then can help you think about data needs, reporting, how you prove the benefits that you're creating and how your food's produced, or how you manage to meet the demands of consumers and businesses in the supply chain to prove that your business, that your food is produced in the right way, to the right standards, to a low carbon footprint. Recommendation 2 talks about mandatory reporting for large food companies, but of course we can see that same requirement working its way down the supply chain and to smaller businesses. So you want to get prepared now, put things in place now to meet that demand. That's my timer going off, but I think I've got another minute, perhaps, Greg, or steal another minute for my last point, really, about does all this change produce new partnership opportunities, and what are those? What are the opportunities to join up and do things better? How do we work together as stakeholders? The supply chain mapping exercise that this group is part of and is underway will help us understand some of the strengths, weaknesses and opportunities, perhaps giving insights about what can be done differently or better. But then we've got a big challenge then to put any findings into practice and say, well, is there a real opportunity for some of the smaller businesses here, farming food businesses, to change the way food is procured, change some of the messaging for consumers, and therefore get a bigger slice of the bigger market share going forward into this new world of new food demand. I think I'll stop there.
You did really well there, and I mean, I just would like to echo the point you made. It was one of the points I was hoping you'd make. Is how are productivity and sustainability, are they friend or foes? Because ultimately, as you quite rightly point out, is many of the objectives and many of the incentives laid out for food production are about less intensive. and you know, and therefore by nature, and yes, there'll be some technology that can play a part, but at what pace, and is that not going to be detrimental to productivity, rather than the improved productivity, which is a measure we're hanging everything on. So I think that's a really good point to make, but that's not your question. Yeah, the question I have for you, David, is there's clearly some challenge in the National Food Strategy, quite rightly, you know, based around fat and sugar. You know, whilst the report itself has been brought together independently, you know, some of the major influencers of what happens are going to be companies such as, and I'll quote them because my Sunday was spent listening to a couple of podcasts about the National Food Strategy, and there was representatives from Mondelez and Nestle. There are international companies that have a really heavy vested interest in products that we're going to be advised to eat lesser. How will that play out, do you think? You know, so, sorry for the challenging question, but how will it play out?
Well, it is a challenging question, and I'm very definitely not the best expert to answer it entirely. But yeah, if we see what's happened in with the soft drinks, really, there's been a lot of reformulation, hasn't there, in how the drinks are produced, along with marketing campaigns to drive consumer behaviour a bit. So we've seen change happening. We've seen less sugar being consumed through drinks. But in the broader, if you look very broadly at the benefits for up and down the supply chain and with businesses and the environment, I'm at least sitting here find it a little bit harder to see whether those benefits have properly filtered the way down through the approach that's being taken. And the risk is we could see the same, you know, if that same approach, that broad agenda broadens out. Is it just those big companies changing formulations, changing strategy a little bit, and without food producers down the supply chain and farming businesses and the wider environment really benefiting completely? I don't know. I think there needs to be more of a driver for whole supply chain considerations, and broader look at, when we look at the benefits of food, actually carbon footprint more broadly brought into the conversation and being relayed in communications, because I think that's when we can start seeing the benefits of really strong local supply chains, really strong connectivity between consumers and food producers and food manufacturers.
You did really well. I mean, it's a really, really challenging question. And I think that, you know, it's one that we just, I think, collectively need to make sure that, you know, integrity is driven through the centre of this. And we're very aware of where there might be different agendas, and make sure that we do all we can to make sure that, you know, it's fair and proper, as we would say in the West Country. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and rely perhaps on Meg to field some questions. So we've got about 20 minutes left, and we'll just have a short summary at the end. So Meg, so the way this works, you'll field some questions, and maybe we'll open up some people who've got their hands up and let them speak as well. And then I'll try and channel them towards one of our speakers, if that's okay.
So the first question in the chat is, what responsibility does DCC carry for the Devon implementation of the National Food Strategy? It'd be interesting to understand the levers for change and how regenerative farming can be supported through the changes. Okay, well, I can see Charlie nice and relaxed there, and I'm almost tempted to send it in her direction, but I'll give her a chance to think about it, and perhaps we should start with Emily responding to that, if that's okay, Emily.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Isabel, for that question. Well, I think actually there's a lot going on in different parts of Devon County Council. So I think what's really helpful about the bringing together of the food partnership is actually that we keep food at the front of it, because I'm based in the environment team, and obviously we're looking at the nature and biodiversity side of it and carbon sequestration, but we do need to marry that with the fact that we're actually producing food as well. So we need to talk to each other. So levers for change that we have to support regenerative farming, there's quite a lot of work going on at the moment. As I said, the development of the land use framework. And actually what I didn't say that I think is really important to highlight, and Ed might add to this, is the reason that we need to have an understanding of what we're trying to achieve at a regional level, even a national level, is that there are some tiers of the new subsidies, ELMs, that imply that you'll have to collaborate at a regional level, you know, at a catchment level maybe. Farmers, to access some pots of money, will need to collaborate with their neighbours. And so we need some kind of mechanism to contextualise that, to signpost to what are the opportunities for those regions, for those other tiers of money. And a land use framework is really important for that. We're also looking at, and this is highlighted in the Devon Carbon Plan, advice for farmers, because farmers need good quality, impartial advice that's not necessarily linked to agronomic advisors that have potentially vested interests linked to the promotion of certain products. Obviously, that's definitely not the case for all advisors, but farmers need to be supported with advice that they can then make the decisions with, work such as on local nature recovery networks will also support the land use framework and what the opportunities are locally. And there's quite a lot happening in the economy team as well, with funding for things like innovation and different agri-tech that we might use, so the adoption of potentially robotics. Anyway, I'll stop talking for a minute because someone else might want to come in.
Can I jump in now, Greg? Is that all right? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to.
I know I was looking relaxed. Yeah, so we're also just to kind of pick up on what Emily said about the work in the economy team. So one of the programs that we've been running is the Future Farming Resilience Program, where we are supporting farmers in actually the heart of the South West LEP areas, that is Devon and Somerset, on supporting them through the transition, through workshops, one-to-one support where they're looking, getting support from expert kind of farming advisors, looking at the impact of their reduction in payments, what they can do to kind of innovate, what they can do to diversify and look at their options moving forward with the new ELM scheme that's coming in. So, and also as part of that, we're doing specialist workshops, and they also will be things like soil management, so kind of picking up on all of those different kind of specialist areas that farmers are now looking to get kind of seek more help and advice around. So that's something that's happening at the moment. And as Emily said, also the other thing that we're looking to support is innovation within farming, and looking at how the agri-tech work that's going across Devon can kind of be brought together as well. So there is lots of kind of work and projects upcoming in that area to support this.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Okay, I've just put into the chat there earlier. Ian referred to an event on Wednesday that we're involved in, which is about dynamic food procurement. I've just put a link in there if you want to sign up for that. It's going to be a pretty good event. Megan, we got another question loaded.
There's a couple of hands up, so Rebecca, do you want to?
Okay, yeah, so Rebecca Sandover.
Hi everyone, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm Dr. Rebecca Sandover from the University of Exeter. I'm also a member of the Devon Food Partnership, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to just make a couple of comments about the challenge and opportunity for sustainable food in Devon, which I think is absolutely fantastic to hear all the presentations today. It's such a wealth of information that we've been able to pull together here. I just wanted to say in particular, a lot of nationwide experts are talking about the fact we need an integrated approach to food policy. food policy and planning. And I think this, the Devon Food Partnership, really highlights the opportunity that we're taking this idea forward at a regional scale. So it's exciting to bring this together. And so when we're talking about an integrated food policy, that does go across all the sectors that we've been discussing today. So across health, agriculture, land use, social issues and education. And that just really highlights today, you know, we've been talking about education and how we can improve our food cultures through education. And I think perhaps one thing we haven't talked about today, and obviously it's really important for everyone in the room and for all our presenters, is about how we communicate these ideas to the general public. So perhaps that's something we could reflect upon. And I know Emily at the Devon Climate Emergency, they've been working on this really closely. So it's great to see that happening, but perhaps something we need to think about a bit more. And I wanted to just also one other point just to highlight, I'm just, you know, excited about the grassroots organisations, the community-based organisations emerging. I think Nicola and some other people referred to some of the sort of more sort of innovative models of food businesses, plus also these innovative retail businesses. So as Greg is obviously involved with, the Southwest Food Hub is a really exciting opportunity for dynamic food procurement. But I also just wanted to flag up, I'm a trustee of Food Exeter, and there's been some extremely exciting work gone on from some of my colleagues at Food Exeter, looking at linking up organisations to create a really sort of relocalised food system in Exeter. So perhaps I'll finish, sorry, I just thought it was useful to reflect on these points. Just finish with a question perhaps for David or anyone else. Anyone has got some great ideas about how we can fund such a really exciting innovative model, such as the Food Exeter local organic food hub? Thank you.
I would have got you to present, Rebecca. I think you've, I don't know how you ducked out there, but yeah, no, it's a very good question. So I think just to capture what you've said there again, because obviously we want to build this into, you know, the brief that we supply back to the National Food Strategy team. I think there's a point there that talks about how do we cascade down and then feed back up, you know, ideas around how we can fix or improve our current food system. And I think the Sustainable Food Places movement is a really good place to start with that. You know, and Devon Food Partnership is, you know, a part of the Sustainable Food Places. And I think that's what we need to make sure is that we are coordinating with other sustainable food places. And that is one way up and down. And I think the other thing is, I was just going to reach across there. I don't want to plug a book, but I'm reading a book at the moment that's called Resonate. And I think that what I feel is that over the last perhaps 5, maybe longer years, there's been more interest in the food culture and in the need for change. And I think there is so much going on that although it feels like, you know, everything in isolation is very difficult to get a result from, the overall interest and pressure that's being brought about is definitely getting more attention at a government level, and it's rightly it should. I think the key thing about backing this national food strategy and helping to finesse it into something that can be landed is that we don't sort of let all that momentum just fizzle out, that we take advantage of this opportunity, unique opportunity in time to make some significant change. That's given David plenty of time to think about the response to the second question, which is how do innovative local projects tap into funding they might need to keep them going?
Yeah, well, there are some funding streams around at a business or collaboration level. We do see through Innovate UK particularly some opportunities, although historically this part of the world hasn't done too well out of Innovate UK funding, probably partly because we've got a lot of rurally dispersed businesses, maybe not at the size and scale, maybe not investing enough themselves in R&D, and therefore we need to do more to get those businesses and collaborations in place so that this area we do much better actually at investment in R&D and innovation, and can draw down a much bigger share of the Innovate UK monies. We get something like it's less than a third of the monies from Innovate UK doesn't find its way for the Southwest, Greater Southwest, doesn't find its way kind of south of Bristol and Bath, you know. So we really have to, not you consider Cornwall and everything else in that stat. So you really got to do more to get those local collaborations in place, join up with Rebecca and her team better, help businesses to connect up with research institutions, universities and the like, to put ourselves in a much better place to draw down that really much larger pots of transformational funding that is out there from time to time, but we just don't get enough of it.
So I think, and just, I suppose, maybe trying to turn that into a bit of an action. And I realise that at the moment there is a bit of uncertainty as to where national funding how that might be channeled out to those that need it most. But, you know, I mean, is it not about time with a national food strategy that there's a specific pot of funds that are made available specifically for food projects that are related to the national food strategy? You know, and maybe we should perhaps, I mean, I know within the strategy itself, it talks about funds and the likely cost and returns on those investments. But, you know, it would be fantastic if there could be a pot made available for the regions to tap into. So worth taking away. Tala, I see that Tala had a hand up and put it down. I assume that maybe because the question was answered, or would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I just put my hand up because my chat isn't working for some reason. I am disabled, and I'm not Tala. I'm on my daughter's school account, so I'm actually Marisa. So I run Love Food CIC, which basically promotes local, organic, vegan and ethical food. And we run a lunch club in Ede and do cookery activities. And I'm also doing some research for Cambridge CVS at the moment into different food projects. So my question was mainly about public sector food and how obviously both the Devon Carbon Plan and the National Food Strategy have recommended a reduction in meat, so less but better meat. And obviously this is for health reasons and environmental reasons. So how can we encourage public sector food to be doing less meat-based dishes, more plant-based dishes, and preferably more pulse-based dishes rather than corn, which is what they all seem to supply at the moment. And I don't think particularly meats health, you know, in terms of having more fibre and a whole food diet, I don't think it particularly meets those. So I was just wondering how the council and other partners think that
let me take that, because I'm mindful of time. So I got the question. I mean, I'm going to hand over to Ian in a second to respond to that. What I would say is that there is a huge amount of choice being developed in food production. And as has been sort of talked about through this session, and as we constantly talk about, is it's not always available for the public sector to use. You know, and you know, the big motivation behind the community interest company that is Southwest Food Hub is to try and embed a system that allows a wider choice to be procured for public sector more easily. You know, and I think that whilst we're talking about a specific opportunity here, you know, I think that the important thing is that we can address and react to lots of different dietary needs and wants and desires, and also local markets, if we change the system and break the system. But Ian, perhaps just can you quickly respond to that more specifically?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what the Sustainable Food Places movement's looking to do is to promote positive choice and promote this in a very positive way. So it's not have less, it's kind of you know, it's have extra, have better, you know, and phrase it in that way. So it's a kind of a strengths-based, a kind of building on assets type model rather than a deficit model. So what they're very, very keen to do, so it's presenting the choices in a good way. So less meat, but more and better vegetables and everything that goes with that. And I think that's a really important way to go. I think there's also something about people are terrified about not having protein. I'm a bit like that myself. And I think the pulses piece, I think, is really interesting. How much protein you can get out of pulses. I think, you know, that needs to be explained and developed and made more of. Another key thing they're really keen to do, picking up on the corn piece and what Greg was saying, is that not to replace processed meat with processed vegetable products as well. I think the Food for Life standard, Karen from there, was saying the other day on a webinar I was on that one of the distinctive things that people like about Food for Life is an accent on preparing from scratch, from fresh ingredients, and all the good things that go with that. And I think that's the important thing. So there's something there about avoiding the processed and starting from scratch. And I think the pulses could play straight into that. Homid Dodds, have I got the name right, from the east of England, doing some brilliant work and some fantastic products. And I'm speaking here as very much an omnivore with a kind of meat-leaning kind of bias, how good that is. So I'd go with that, I think. Is that helpful?
That's brilliant.
Nice to see you. Thanks.
Good. And I think importantly for the context of this, you know, it's something we can include within our recommendations, our brief to the National Food Strategy. Meg, I think we've got time for one more question before moving on to the summary. So have you got one lined up or somebody you would like to ask?
So this is one for Ian. Has any work been done locally on the curricular side of food education in schools? Any local examples that you know of?
The one I know of in any depth is Food is Fun community interest company, Food is Fun CIC, who for years and years have been working with children, families, schools around cooking fresh, healthy, sustainable meals from scratch on a budget. But I know they're not alone in that, but they're the one I'm aware of, and it'd be great to see more of that across the county and wider from that point of view. Also on the growing side, if I can just point that as well, Nikki Scott's on the call, and we're talking with Nikki in Plymouth here around work we're doing with the nursery down in Plymouth around composting and soil and growing sustainable healthy food there as well. So that's another one. That's the what is that called? Generous Earth, that project's called, and the nursery is Snapdragons in Victoria Park in Plymouth. Thank you.
Greg, can I just jump in? Sorry. Education wise also, so NFU run a STEM to Prize project. So we have our own education department, which is free for schools and teachers to access. So please go on and have a look. Go on NFU online. They can sign up to a newsletter. Everything is set for them, and it will teach the children about where food comes from, about healthy food, dietary parts, and it all parts of it all fits within the STEM system. So science, technology, education, maths, so English and maths. So it's all there, so it can fit the curriculum really easily. And also, can I just coming back to the comment earlier is, with food choice, especially with procurement, biggest thing we need to remember is about a balanced diet, because a point that we get raised to us in many instances is every child, especially in schools, children should have choice, because some of those children might only eat one hot meal a day, and that might be their school lunch. And if they should also have a choice. So when we talk about red meat and the quality of red meat, we need to make sure that there is still meat on that diet for them as a choice, because ultimately they might not get the chances of a dietary choice like that at home. So just bearing that in mind and making sure that we're being balanced, and where possible give every child every opportunity, or whether it's procurement for council offices, for staff, for anyone, to give them a range of choice that works out the impact. So there's also a question there about carbon scoring on labelling. This is something I believe may well come in. I mean, it's gradually, more and more talk about it. The difficulty is where do you score it? Because ultimately, a Devon animal or Devon produced crop or vegetable, but coming into Devon in a local procurement will have a lower score. And it's ensuring that that score is recognised from a county basis. And then how does that affect to a national framework? So it could be very complicated. But ultimately, you'll see that some of these scores, especially on all types of products, no matter whether it's meat or vegetable or anything. It could be vastly different if it's imported or sent around the world.
Ed, I think you make a really good point, and I think that might well form the part of a future event that we might be interested in bringing together as the Devon Food Partnership, because I think it's a really valid point, and yeah, I look forward to. We should cover more about that. But I am very conscious and mindful of time, so we're at 11:29. I just thought it might be quite good to just look at the summary. So thank you everybody for the participations. Thank you for the speakers and organisers. Just in summary of what we're doing next, our aim is to bring together a consolidated brief based on today's event and including the Q&As to bring that together to go before our steering group on the 15th of December. And then we want to try and get something out before Christmas. So therefore, and others are doing this, not me, so it's great to talk about it. But to have something submitted to the National Food Strategy White Paper by the 20th of December, we just think it's important to get it in this year. And then, to be included in the January report. It may slip from that, but we don't intend to slip. And then we will document, the document will be shared on our website and also to other local stakeholders. And then, we're hoping that that will then maybe trigger a response from the National Food Strategy, and then we can make sure that we keep everybody interested, updated through the Devon Food Partnership website. So that was what we intended to do today. I'm conscious that we're now not on I've done well to not destroy the technology, but again, just to reiterate, thanks again for everybody's participation. As was spoken about earlier by Charlie, this is the first of a number of such events that we want to pull together. Our ambition is to make sure that we talk about the most important issues in our sector, and then we form a voice, and then we share that voice with those that are most appropriate. So I think we'll close it there. Thank you very much. I guess we can wish you a Merry Christmas, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Good session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.